Welcome to another episode of Discograffiti's wildly in-depth Beach Boys series and Your Dreams Come True, where Brian Wilson freaks like you and me get our chance to delve deep into the barely believable history and prodigious discography of my favorite band of all time, and also coincidentally the best, along with a slew of over 50 top-shelf guests, ranging from musicians inspired by their work, family members, documentary directors, songwriting collaborators, Beach Boys authors, producers, touring band members, and for good measure, some of the Beach Boys themselves. I'm your host, Dave Gebrow, and special thanks goes out to co-producers Chuck Granata, Dennis Dyken, and Mark Freed, without whom this series would not have happened. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. Welcome to the Chuck Granata interview series, a very special collection of conversations about the Beach Boys' pet sounds that have never before seen the light of day. In the early 2000s, my friend Chuck Granata conducted a series of telephone interviews with members of the Beach Boys, studio musicians, family members, historians, authors, experts, and more, recording it all on minidisc and pulling quotes that ultimately wound up in his incredible book, Wouldn't It Be Nice? Brian Wilson and the Making of the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. The minidiscs with the interviews were then all labeled, boxed up, and packed away. That is, until now. Chuck has done a bit of audio sprucing where needed, and I've trimmed them down for broadcast, but otherwise, this act of loving curation is brought to you as an act of historical TLC. Of course, I can't possibly thank Chuck Granata enough, and you should definitely pick up his book if you haven't already. The next entry in the Chuck Granata Pet Sounds interview series is part one of Chuck's chat with Brian Wilson's favorite drummer, legendary studio maestro Hal Blaine. It's not hard to understand why Brian worked with him so often. Hal claimed to have participated in over 35,000 sessions and 6,000 singles. His drumming is featured on 150 U.S. top 10 hits, 40 of which went to number one. Chuck's interview with Hal took place while the latter was living in a retirement community, and the tone is definitely no shits given by this point. Hal passed away a few years later in 2019, which makes this posthumously released Chuck Chat yet another priceless buried treasure. Here it is then, Hal Blaine.
So Brian really liked that house, huh?
Brian loved that house, yeah. As I said, he turned around and bought what we called the Bellagio house, where he eventually locked himself in, and the sandbox and all that terrible shit that went down. I hated losing that house. It was one of those things that divorce can, maybe I don't even have to tell you, but, you know, in California they knock the shit out of you. They really get you. So, unfortunately, Barbara the Barbarian took me for the ride of my life.
Wow. Yeah,
I lost my yacht, I lost my rolls, I lost everything.
Man, that's sad.
I mean, I was almost at the point of suicide, and I said, I won't do it. Thank God I had the best credit in the world, because after having to come up with all the cash, and you don't keep that kind of cash, you don't have that kind of cash with all the investments and the pension and everything in the world. This woman had to have 50% of it all for the 10, 11 years we were married. I was making a couple $100,000 a year. That's a whole lot of money. It took me about another 12, 13 years living on credit cards, and I had to move from a 23-room house into goddamn clothes closets, renting. It was nuts.
Yeah.
It was nuts.
Well, that's all behind you, so...
Exactly.
It's a good thing. I had read about the gold records, where you said you had to get rid of all your gold.
Sell all my gold records.
What a shame.
It's funny, there's a wonderful drummer by the name of John Schwartz. They call him Bermuda Shorts. And John is Weird Al Yankovic's drummer. Been with him for years and years. And one day this friend of mine called me, another drummer, Jake Jacobs, fine drummer, called me and he said, this friend of mine, John Schwartz, would like to meet you. And I said, sure, anytime. I was renting a little apartment. And Jake said, it's John's birthday. It's Bermuda's birthday. And I said, well, great, sure. Come on over, you have some food, hang out a little bit. And I did. Well, as it was time to leave, when we were all leaving, and everybody was, hello, goodbye, thank you, and it was nice meeting John, he walks up to me and he sticks something under my arm. It was rather large. And he said, we can't have a birthday without you getting something. I said, come on, man, what are you talking about? Don't be silly. So I opened this up, and it was one of my John Denver Gold albums. And these were all RIAA certified. All my albums were, and all my singles. I had to get rid of physically about 170 or 72, something like that. Made me sick, all the Fifth Dimension and Nancy and Frank and on and on and on. I got wonderful pictures of Warner Brothers handing me gold records for Petula Clark and I think Frank. Well, you know, Brian came over to my house one day and he had 5 RIAA gold albums and he said, these should be yours. You know, you work so hard. And I said, Brian, what are you talking about? These are made out to the Beach Boys. Come on, man. No. He was insisting that I keep these, and I kept telling him I cannot do that. Put them back in the car. Well, meanwhile, the little Mexican lady was working for us, and she brought in some cookies and coffee or something, and we sat and we had something, and I went to the bathroom. When I came back, Brian was just leaving, going out the door, and I said, all right, I'll talk to you later. Maybe we're going to be in the studio that night. And that was the end of it. A couple hours later, this lady came running in, and she said, Mr. Blaine, come here. And she showed me behind the couch. Brian had stuck 3 of them. You know, the RIAAs with the beautiful light-colored backgrounds, which are so valuable today.
They are.
Almost everything is in black today.
Right.
Anyway, that's the way Brian was, and he was wonderful.
He was a very generous person.
Yeah, and it was so sad to see him to start going through because there were no drugs around us. None of us had anything to do with drugs. You know, our only vice was we all smoked cigarettes. And we would, you know, do sessions and we would smoke cigarettes or we would go out and drink coffee or Coca-Cola. And there just was no drugs around. We never talked about drugs or anything else. It wasn't until the mamas and papas kind of brought it out in the open a little bit later. All of a sudden, unbeknownst to us, Brian was dropping some acid.
All right, that concludes your free sneak peek into today's Patreon episode. If you want to hear the rest of it, just visit patreon.com/discograffiti and either purchase this podcast by itself for $4, or better yet, subscribe at the major tier and get access to Discograffiti's 4 weekly episodes. That's Friday's free episode, the Sunday Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound episode, which showcases Patreon members and the Elephant Six world, your Monday bonus episode, and your Wednesday early release, ad-free, super extended director's cut of that Friday's show. Please keep in mind this is entirely how I support my wife and 6-year-old son, so don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not supporting Discograffiti. Become a member so you don't miss a single thing at patreon.com/discograffiti.